Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
My husband said, "I'm leaving you for your best friend. I'm happy with her." He took our house in the divorce, but a notary called me. "Your first husband from 2010 died and left you $120 million. But there's one condition." Welcome back, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to believe that a quiet life was a happy life. Looking back now, I think I confused the two. And that confusion cost me years I'll never get back. My name is Laura Haynes. I was 42 years old when my world split open like a fault line that had been building pressure for decades. I lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in Naperville, Illinois. The kind of house with a wraparound porch and flower beds that I tended every spring with my own hands. I had a job I was good at, senior acquisitions editor at a mid-sized publishing house in Chicago. I had a husband named Derek, and I had a best friend named Christine. Derek and I had been married for 9 years. We met at a fundraiser for a literacy nonprofit, which, in hindsight, is almost funny, given how illiterate I turned out to be when it came to reading the people closest to me. He was handsome in a reliable, broad-shouldered way. He sold commercial real estate. He remembered anniversaries and fixed leaky faucets and made the bed without being asked. I thought that made him a good man. Christine had been my best friend since our junior year at the University of Illinois. She was the maid of honor at my wedding to Derek. She sat with me in the hospital when my mother had her knee replaced. She called me every Sunday morning without fail for 11 years. I would have trusted her with my life. The first sign came in October, 14 months before everything collapsed. I came home from a work trip to New York. 3 days, a publishing conference. And something in the house felt different. Not wrong, exactly. Just rearranged. The way a room feels when someone has been in it and tried very hard to make it look like they haven't. A throw pillow on the wrong couch. A wine glass in the drying rack when Derek claimed he hadn't been drinking. A faint smell. Something floral, sweet, not mine. I asked him about it. He said his sister had stopped by. His sister lived in Indianapolis and never visited without calling first. I let it go. The second sign came in January. I found a restaurant receipt in Derek's jacket pocket, a place downtown that I'd mentioned wanting to try. He'd gone there for Valentine's Day the year before and said he'd made a reservation. But the receipt was dated a Tuesday in January, a night he'd told me he was working late. The receipt was for 2 people. The wine was a bottle, not a glass. I asked him about it. He said it was a client dinner. He looked me in the eye when he said it. I almost believed him. The third sign was Christine. She had been my constant for so long that I noticed the moment her frequency changed. She started canceling our Sunday calls. Not always. Maybe 1 in 3. And when we did talk, there was something behind her words, a slightly different register, like a singer performing a song she no longer felt. She laughed a beat too late. She asked about Derek in a way that sounded rehearsed. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had a tendency toward anxiety. I knew that about myself, and I had learned over the years to talk myself down from ledges that turned out to be nothing. I was good at rationalizing. Too good. And then came the Tuesday in March. I had left work early with a migraine. I drove home in the gray afternoon, the kind of cold Illinois day that makes the world look like a photograph someone has drained of color. I pulled into the driveway and saw Christine's car parked in front of my house. I thought, she must have stopped by to surprise me. I thought, how sweet. I let myself in through the side door that led to the kitchen. I set my bag down on the counter, and then I heard voices. His voice, her voice, coming from upstairs, from our bedroom. with a particular quality of intimacy that no amount of rationalization in the world could explain away. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, and I did not move for what felt like a very long time. When Derek came downstairs and found me standing there, he didn't pretend. Maybe he was tired of pretending, or maybe he just didn't care anymore. He stood on the last step, and he looked at me with something that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite defiance. Something in between, the expression of a man who has already made his decision. "Laura," he said, I'm leaving you for Christine." He paused. "I'm happy with her," he said. "I haven't been happy here for a long time." Christine appeared at the top of the stairs. She didn't come down. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood in my own kitchen, and I felt something leave me. Not heartbreak exactly, but something more structural, like a beam giving way inside a wall. A quiet, internal collapse. What do you say when the two people you trusted most in the world are standing in your house, in your marriage, looking at you like you are the obstacle? I said nothing. I picked up my bag, and I walked back out the side door into the cold. I spent that first night in a hotel 3 miles from my house, a Hampton Inn off the interstate, the kind of place that smells like industrial laundry detergent and other people's bad days. I sat on the edge of the bed, with my coat still on, and stared at the wall until the digital clock read 3:47 a.m. Grief is strange. It doesn't always arrive as sadness. Sometimes it comes as pure clarity, a sudden, almost brutal ability to see everything exactly as it is, stripped of the softening you've been doing for months without realizing it. That night, alone in that room, I wasn't crying. I was counting. I was counting what I stood to lose. The house was the obvious thing. Derek and I had bought it together 8 years ago, but he had contributed 60% of the down payment from a real estate commission windfall early in our marriage. His name was on the deed first. Our mortgage attorney back then had suggested I ensure equal ownership was documented. I had nodded and meant to follow up. I never did. It was one of those small administrative tasks that gets postponed and then forgotten in the routine of a functioning life. Now it sat in my chest like a stone. The joint accounts, approximately $84,000. The investment account, just over $200,000, also jointly held. But Derek had managed it almost entirely and had, I realized, been redirecting his commissions to a separate account for the past 2 years. I had seen statements. I had not examined them closely enough. I had been careless in the way that only people who believe they are safe can be careless. By morning, I had called my office and taken a personal day. I drove to a Starbucks I'd never been to before, not one near our house, not one near Christine's neighborhood, and I sat at a corner table with a yellow legal pad. I wrote down everything I knew, every asset, every account, every piece of property. I drew a line down the center of the page. Left side, mine. Right side, his. Then I drew a third column, the most honest one, and I labeled it disputed. The third column was almost everything. I was afraid. I want to be honest about that. I was not a woman who had navigated divorce court before. I was a woman who edited literary fiction and grew tomatoes in the summer and knew the names of her neighbors' dogs. I did not know what a QDRO was. I did not know how to subpoena bank records. I did not know what marital waste meant as a legal term. But I knew how to research, and I knew how to read, and I knew that the gap between ignorance and knowledge can be closed with enough time and enough willingness to be uncomfortable. The fear did not paralyze me. It oriented me. I made 2 phone calls that afternoon. The first was to my cousin Rachel, who had gone through a contentious divorce in Atlanta 5 years earlier. She didn't offer sympathy. I didn't ask for it. I asked her for the name of the best divorce attorney she had encountered during her proceedings, even if that attorney had been on the other side. She gave me a name, Margaret Osei, a family law attorney in Chicago, with a reputation for being, as Rachel put it, the kind of woman who finds things. The second call I almost didn't make. I sat with my phone in my hand for 10 minutes before I dialed. It was to a number I hadn't used in 12 years, the number of a man named James Whitfield. James had been my first husband. We had married young, divorced young, parted without bitterness. He had moved to Oregon and, last I'd heard, had done well in tech. We exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, and then even that had faded. The call went to voicemail. His voice on the recording was older, but recognizable. I left a message. I said I was going through something difficult and was just thinking of old friends. I didn't know why I called, not really, except that in moments of complete disorientation, we sometimes reach for the earliest version of who we were, before the mistakes accumulated. I hung up and didn't expect to hear back. That evening, I returned to the house while Derek's car was gone. I moved methodically through each room. I photographed documents, tax returns, mortgage statements, investment records, insurance policies. I took the hard drive from our shared home computer. I took the box of paper files from the office closet. I was not stealing. These were my records too. But I knew that very soon the conversation would shift into territory where what I knew and what I could prove were very different things. I found one more thing in the drawer of Derek's nightstand, a folder. Inside it were printed emails between him and Christine, going back 22 months. He had printed them himself and kept them. I've never understood why people do that, keep evidence of their own betrayal. But they do. Perhaps he was sentimental. Perhaps he was careless. Perhaps he simply never imagined I would be standing in his bedroom with a camera and a plan. I photographed every page. The plan was simple at first. Consult an attorney. Document everything. Understand my legal position before Derek had a chance to establish his. Do not act from anger. Act from knowledge. But that night, driving back to the Hampton Inn with a box of files in my backseat, something else occurred to me. Something that didn't fit neatly into the legal strategy, but that felt important in a way I couldn't yet name. Derek thought he had won already. Christine thought so too. They were probably sitting in my house that night, making plans, assuming that I would grieve quietly and settle for whatever they offered me, the way a woman who is blindsided usually does. They did not know me as well as they thought, and neither did I, not yet. But I was about to find out. Margaret Osei's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building on North LaSalle Street, with a view of the Chicago River that felt like a statement of intent. Clear, wide, moving forward. She was 51 years old, Ghanaian American, and had the specific kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from absolute confidence. She read my notes, looked at my photographs, and set them down on her desk with the measured precision of someone who has seen much worse and remained unbothered. "Tell me about the house," she said. I told her. She wrote things down without reacting. When I finished, she said, "The down payment contribution is a complicating factor, but not a decisive one. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. That doesn't mean equal. It means fair, based on circumstances. 9 years of marriage, your income contributions, any improvements made to the property, all of that counts." She paused. "The emails you photographed, Are you certain they document the beginning of the relationship? I said the earliest one was dated 22 months ago. She nodded once, slowly, and said, alienation of affection is not actionable in Illinois, but financial misconduct during a marriage is. If he was diverting commission income to a separate account during the affair, using marital funds to support an extramarital relationship, that changes the calculus significantly. I asked her what that meant for the house. It means we file first, she said, and we file with documentation. We filed the following Thursday. Derek was served at his office, Margaret's choice, deliberate. Not at home, where he could absorb the shock privately. At his workplace, in front of colleagues, on a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. I was not there. I did not need to be. But later, Margaret's assistant told me that he had been walking out of a meeting when the process server approached him, and that the expression on his face had been, in her words, something to see. Christine called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. I sat in my hotel room. I had moved to a furnished short-term rental by then, a small one-bedroom in Evanston, and I listened to her voice message twice. She sounded injured. She said she hoped we could handle this like adults. She said she cared about me and didn't want things to get ugly. She said she was sorry. She was not sorry. She was scared. I did not call back. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know for another 10 days, was that Derek had immediately called a real estate attorney friend of his, a man named Phil Daly, who had handled several of Derek's commercial deals. Phil was not a family law attorney. He was not qualified to navigate the specifics of what Margaret had filed, but he was loyal to Derek, and more importantly, he was aggressive, and that made him dangerous in a different way. I found this out because my neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Barbara Holloway, who had lived 3 houses down from us for 16 years and had never particularly liked Derek, called me one morning to tell me she had seen a man she didn't recognize taking photographs of the house. She had written down his license plate. She texted it to me, along with a photograph she'd taken from her front window. I gave the plate number to Margaret. The car was registered to a private investigations firm with an address in Schaumburg. So, Derek had hired someone to build a counter-narrative, probably looking for anything he could use. Evidence that I had been a bad wife, a neglectful partner, some behavioral justification for his choices that would shift the moral and legal weight. People do this in divorces. They try to make the person they wronged look like the person who deserved it. The discovery was clarifying. Not frightening, clarifying. It told me Derek understood the stakes. It told me he was not going to give me what was mine without a fight. And it told me something more important, that he was paying attention. Which meant I had to be careful about what I did next and how visible I made it. The real proof came on a Wednesday, 11 days after we filed. Margaret had engaged a forensic accountant, a woman named Dr. Sandra Wu, to examine Derek's financial records from the preceding 3 years. The records had been subpoenaed as part of discovery. Dr. Wu called Margaret, who called me, and I drove to Margaret's office in the early afternoon and sat across her desk while she read from a preliminary summary. Derek had opened a personal savings account in his name only in January 2 years ago, 1 month after the earliest email in the folder I'd found. Over 22 months, he had transferred a total of $67,400 from our joint accounts into this account. The transfers were small, irregular, designed to fall below the threshold that triggers automatic review. He had used this account to pay for hotel stays, dinners, a weekend trip to Charleston, 2 pieces of jewelry purchased at a boutique on Michigan Avenue. The jewelry, Margaret noted, was not for me. I could confirm that. I had received no jewelry from Derek in the past 2 years. I sat with that for a moment. $67,000. The careful, incremental theft of it. The calculation required. The patience. This is financial misconduct during the marriage, Margaret said. In equitable distribution, this significantly strengthens your claim to the house and the investment account. He spent marital funds on a third party. The court will treat this as dissipation of assets. I looked at the river through her window. Was this justice? Not yet. But it was the beginning of something that was going to look very much like it. The plan had 3 components, and we executed the first one in April. Margaret filed a motion for exclusive possession of the marital home pending the divorce proceedings, citing Derek's financial misconduct and the documented diversion of marital assets. It was a strong motion. Dr. Wu's preliminary findings were attached as supporting documentation. The argument was straightforward. Derek had used the shared home as a venue for the affair and had systematically drained joint accounts to fund it. Allowing him to remain in possession of the property while the case was resolved would constitute ongoing harm. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning. Derek arrived with Phil Daly, who had, by then, associated a family law attorney named Roger Marsh into the case. Roger Marsh was the kind of attorney who wore pocket squares and interrupted judges. He was expensive and theatrical, and according to Margaret, largely ineffective in complex financial cases because he confused volume with persuasion. I sat beside Margaret and did not look at Derek. I had decided before the hearing that I would not look at him unless I needed to. Not from hurt. I was past hurt, or at least I had set it aside in the particular functional way that becomes necessary when there is work to be done. I didn't look at him because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of reading my face. The judge granted temporary exclusive possession to me. Derek's face, when Margaret told me to look up, was the color of old concrete. I moved back into my house the following Tuesday. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after the movers left. The house smelled different. A new candle scent I didn't recognize. Something that wasn't mine. I opened every window, even though it was cold. I washed everything Christine had probably touched. It sounds petty, written down like that. But standing in my kitchen at 10 o'clock in the morning, with the late April air coming through the screens, I felt something returning to me. Something that had been evacuated in that moment on the stairs, and it felt necessary and right to claim the space back, inch by inch. The threat came 9 days later. I was at my kitchen table with a glass of iced tea and a stack of financial documents when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I did. It was Derek, not calling from his cell, from what I would later confirm was a burner number. His voice was controlled, but barely. He said he knew what I was doing. He said I was going to regret it. He said I should think very carefully about what I was stirring up, because if this went to full litigation, things were going to come out about me that I wouldn't want people to know. What things? I said. He paused. Then he said that he had a friend, a source, who could speak to my mental health history. He said my doctor visits, my past anxiety treatment, my medication, could all be framed in a way that would make me look unstable. He said a judge would think twice about awarding significant assets to a woman who had been treated for anxiety and depression. I said, "Derek, are you threatening to use my medical history against me in court?" He didn't answer. "Because that would be a very specific kind of illegal," I said. "And I'd like you to know that I'm recording this conversation." I wasn't. I had not been recording it. But Illinois is a one-party consent state, meaning I could record any conversation I was part of legally without telling the other party. I began recording immediately after I said that, with my second phone, which I kept on the table for exactly this kind of contingency. Margaret had told me to keep it there. I recorded the next 40 seconds of silence and the sound of him ending the call. I sent the recording to Margaret that night, along with a written summary of everything he had said. She filed a motion for sanctions the following week, citing harassment and attempted intimidation of an opposing party. Roger Marsh submitted a response calling my account creative and claiming his client had made no such call. But the burner number, when traced, linked back to a prepaid phone purchased at a Walgreens in Oak Brook, 2 miles from Derek's temporary rental. It wasn't conclusive, but it was enough to make the judge look at Derek differently. Christine's intervention came 3 days after that. She showed up at my office building in Chicago, not at my home, where she might have expected me to refuse entry, but at my workplace, as if the neutral ground of a professional setting would give her an advantage. My assistant called me from the lobby. "There's a woman here who says she's your friend, Christine Hale. She says it's urgent." I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. "Send her up," I said. She sat across from me in my office and she cried. She said she never meant for this to happen. She said she had fought her feelings for a long time. She said she loved me and hated herself. She said she wanted me to drop the case. Not the divorce. She wasn't asking me not to divorce Derek, but the financial claim, the asset litigation, the forensic accounting. She said it was destroying them. She said if I continued, Derek would lose his real estate license. Something about how the commission account transfers, if examined further, might trigger a regulatory review. "You're asking me to protect him," I said. "I'm asking you to protect yourself," she said. "This level of conflict, it's going to hurt you too, emotionally, professionally." She leaned forward. "Laura, you know me. I know you. Is this really who you want to be?" It was a good manipulation. I'll give her that. She had known me for 20 years and she knew exactly where to press. "Christine," I said, "get out of my office." She left. I sat very still for a while after she went. Then I called Margaret and told her what had happened. Margaret listened without comment until I finished, and then she said, "Document it. Time, date, what was said. We may want to add a communication restriction to the existing motions." That weekend I drove to Michigan. Not for any practical reason, just to be somewhere that was not Chicago, not Naperville, not the terrain of all of it. I rented a small cabin near South Haven, and I spent 2 days reading a novel and walking along the lakeshore and eating at a diner where nobody knew me. I watched the water, and I let myself feel, for the first time since March, something adjacent to peace. I needed that. I needed to remember that there was a version of my life that was mine alone, not defined by Derek's choices or Christine's betrayal or the long procedural machinery of family court. There was a woman who liked novels and lakeshore walks and diner coffee. She was still there. She had not been erased. I drove back to Naperville on Sunday evening, ready for whatever came next. The call came on a Monday, late afternoon, while I was reviewing page proofs at my desk. It was Phil Daly, not Margaret, not the court, not some formal channel, but Derek's real estate attorney calling my direct line at work. He introduced himself politely and said he was reaching out off the record, one professional to another. He said Derek wanted to make an offer, not through the attorneys. A private arrangement, outside the litigation. He said Derek was prepared to sign the house over to me outright, with no contest, if I agreed to drop the forensic accounting examination and accept a 50-50 split of the joint investment account. "The house is worth $640,000, I said. "That's correct. The investment account has $212,000 in it." "Approximately, yes. So he's offering me the house and $106,000 in exchange for stopping the forensic review that would reveal how he's been misappropriating marital funds for 2 years. There was a pause on the line. Phil Daly said, That's one way to characterize it. Is there another way? Another pause. He's offering you a clean exit. No more depositions. No more court dates. You take the house, half the account, and you move on with your life. I looked out my office window at the Chicago skyline, gray and clear against an early May sky. I thought about what Derek was really afraid of. Not the house, not even the money. He was afraid of what Sandra Wu's forensic review would find if it went deeper. The 22 months of transfers I already knew about. Was that all of it? Or was that only the portion he'd been careless enough to leave a trail for? Phil Daly's call told me there was more. Derek would not be offering me this much if there were nothing further to protect. Tell Derek, I said, that I'll be in touch through my attorney. I hung up. Then I sat with my hands flat on my desk and I breathed. Cold. That's the word for what I felt. Not angry, not vindicated. Cold. The kind of cold that is actually clarity. I was being offered a bribe wrapped in the language of generosity, and the offer itself confirmed that I was standing exactly where I needed to be standing. I did not call Margaret until the following morning. I wanted to sleep on it, not because I was uncertain, but because I had learned over the preceding weeks that decisions made in the residual heat of a provocation are often 1 degree less precise than they need to be. I slept. I woke up with the same answer I had gone to sleep with. Tell Sandra Wu to go deeper, I said. Margaret, for the first time since I had hired her, allowed herself a small smile. But what I needed most in those weeks was not strategy. It was witness. It was someone who knew me outside of the legal framework, who could sit with me in the parts of this that had nothing to do with asset division or forensic accounting, in the simple human grief of having been betrayed by the 2 people closest to you. That person turned out to be my colleague, Diane Park. Diane was the deputy editor at my publishing house, 10 years my senior, Korean American, twice divorced herself, with the particular wisdom that comes from having been through something and chosen to learn from it rather than harden around it. We had been friendly for years, but not close. The kind of workplace relationship that stays pleasant by staying surface level. I'm not entirely sure why I told her. We were eating lunch in the small conference room one afternoon in May, just the 2 of us, and I suppose something in my expression gave me away, because she set down her fork and said, "Laura, what's happening with you?" And I told her. All of it. She did not offer advice. She did not say, "I always knew Derek was wrong for you," or "Christine was never really your friend." The things people say in those moments that are meant to be comforting and are actually erasures of your own history and judgment. She said, "That must have been a profound shock." And then, "And now you're doing what needs to be done." It was enough. More than enough. Diane introduced me to her therapist, a woman named Dr. Carol Reeves, who had an office near the Art Institute and a calm, measured practice that did not involve lying on a couch or interpreting dreams. We talked, once a week, about the gap between who I had thought I was, a woman embedded in a safe, understood life, and who I was becoming, which was less comfortable, but more real. Dr. Reeves said something I wrote down and kept. Betrayal doesn't reveal who your enemies are. It reveals who you are when the scaffolding falls. I was also finding, unexpectedly, that people reached toward me when they knew. Barbara Holloway brought over a casserole and sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours telling me about her own first marriage, which I had not known about. A former colleague who had gone through a protracted divorce 7 years ago sent me a carefully compiled list of resources, legal, financial, emotional, with a note that said, "You won't need all of this, but it's good to have the whole map." small gestures, weighted, each one with the particular significance of being freely given. I was not alone. I had not understood before this how thoroughly I had insulated myself inside a marriage. How two people can, over the course of years, slowly become each other's only real witnesses. And how, when that structure dissolves, the first sensation is not freedom, but exposure. The exposure was frightening, but the people who reached through it were real. I sat in my reclaimed house on a Sunday evening in late May, a glass of wine on the coffee table and Dr. Reeves' notebook on my lap, and I thought, I have more than I thought I had. I always did. I just wasn't looking. Derek and Christine were watching. I knew they were. The PI photographs, the failed negotiation attempt, Christine's office visit. They were trying to read me, to find the moment when I would falter or recede. They expected the version of me that had been quietly accommodating for 9 years, the woman who let things slide, who prioritized harmony over precision, who trusted without verifying. That woman still existed, but she had learned something, and she was done being the easiest person in the room. They came together. That was the part I hadn't anticipated. Not Derek alone, not Christine alone, but both of them, on a Saturday afternoon in June, ringing my doorbell with the particular confidence of people who have coordinated in advance. I saw them on the Ring camera before I opened the door. I stood in my hallway for a moment and watched the small screen. Derek in a blue linen shirt. Christine in the kind of casual, expensive dress she wore when she wanted to seem unthreatening. They were standing close together, but not touching, managing their optics, even on a suburban doorstep. I opened the door. "We'd like to talk," Derek said. "Just the three of us. No attorneys." I looked at Christine. She offered me a careful, practiced expression that I recognized from 20 years of friendship. The face she made when she wanted something and was willing to be warm to get it. I had seen that face directed at waiters, at landlords, at her ex-boyfriends. I had never, until recently, understood that I had always been subject to it too. 5 minutes, I said. I didn't step back from the doorway. I let them stand on the porch. Derek spoke first. He said the litigation was damaging both of us. He said court proceedings had a way of escalating costs, financial and emotional, beyond what anyone anticipated at the outset. He said he had made mistakes, serious ones, and he wasn't here to relitigate who was more at fault. He said he wanted to reach an agreement that was fair to both parties and that allowed everyone to move forward. It was a good speech. Measured. Contrite without being specific, which is the safest kind of contrition. Christine went next. She reached out and touched my arm. I let her, though I did not respond to it. And she said, "Laura, I have been thinking about you every single day since March. I know what I did. I know there's no excuse. But you and I have 20 years between us, and I can't believe that has to mean nothing." "What do you want?" I said. Derek and Christine exchanged a glance. Brief, involuntary, the kind of glance that communicates something specific between two people who have been talking at length about the person in front of them. "We want you to consider a different path," Derek said. "We've spoken to a mediator, someone neutral, recommended by both our attorneys. Mediation would allow us to settle the financial questions without a full trial. Faster, less expensive, less," he searched for the word, "destructive." "And Sandra Wu's investigation," I said, "would be paused during mediation." There it was. "So the condition for your sudden interest in fairness," I said slowly, "is that we stop the forensic accounting." "It would be part of the mediation framework," Derek said. "Standard practice." "It's not standard practice," I said. Mediation doesn't require suspending a forensic accounting engagement. That's something you're asking for specifically. A muscle in his jaw tightened. Christine leaned forward. Laura, think about what this fight is doing to you. The stress, the sleeplessness. Diane mentioned to me that I felt something go cold inside me. Diane, I said. You called Diane. Christine blinked. We're old friends, Diane and I. You called my colleague and asked about me. I was concerned. You were gathering information, I said, about my mental state, about how I was holding up. Because you and Derek decided that if I was falling apart, you might be able to convince me to settle on your terms. Neither of them spoke. I looked at Derek, then at Christine. 20 years of friendship, 9 years of marriage. And here we were, the three of us, on a porch on a suburban Saturday, and all of it had come down to this. They needed something from me, and they had dressed the need in the language of reconciliation. I want you both to leave my property, I said. Derek took a step forward, not physically threatening, but entering my space in a way that was meant to signal authority. Laura, if you continue this, you're going to get hurt. I have enough, Derek. My voice was very quiet. I have a recording application running on my phone right now. Would you like to continue what you were about to say? He stopped. Leave, I said. They left. Derek's walk back to his car had the slightly stiff quality of a man recalibrating. Christine looked back once from the passenger window as they pulled out of the driveway. I don't know what she expected to see on my face. Whatever it was, I hope she didn't find it. I closed the door and stood in my hallway and let myself shake for a moment. Because I was afraid. That's the truth. Derek's half-finished sentence, his step forward, the knowledge that he had more he was willing to threaten me with. All of that was real. I felt it in my body in the way that fear announces itself, as something cold moving from the chest outward. But here is what I had learned about fear in those months. It has texture. There is the fear that immobilizes, that sends you to a hotel room and keeps you awake until 3:47 a.m. And there is the fear that clarifies, that tells you with absolute precision what is actually at stake. The second kind is not comfortable, but it is useful. I called Margaret from the kitchen. She picked up on the second ring. They came to the house, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me everything. I did. When I finished, she said, I'm going to ask Sandra Wu to work over the weekend. I want the preliminary report filed Monday morning. She paused. Laura, whatever Derek was about to say before you stopped him, he had something, or thinks he does. We need to be ahead of it. I know, I said. Are you all right? I looked around my kitchen. The windows I had opened in April. The familiar light. The house that was mine again. Yes, I said. I am. And I meant it. The preliminary report from Dr. Sandra Wu was filed on Monday, as Margaret had promised. I was in Margaret's office when she walked us through it, a 41-page document that had the neutrally devastating quality of financial truth set down in precise language. Dr. Wu had found the $67,400 I already knew about. She had also found the rest. Over a period of 3 years, not 2, as Derek had allowed me to believe, Derek had structured a secondary financial architecture designed to operate in the shadow of our joint accounts. The personal savings account had been the visible portion. But there was also a limited liability company, registered in Delaware, with a name that meant nothing. Halcyon Consulting Group, LLC. It had no clients. It had no consulting work. It had a business checking account into which Derek had been routing a portion of his commercial commissions by listing them as referral fees paid to an independent contractor. That contractor was Halcyon Consulting, which was Derek. The total amount routed through this structure over 3 years, $214,000. The house, the affair, the threat about my mental health, all of it suddenly had a different context. Derek had not simply cheated on me. He had been constructing an exit for years, methodically and carefully, draining our shared future into a vessel that would survive the divorce as his private asset. The affair had probably accelerated his timeline, but it had not created the plan. The plan was older and colder and far more premeditated than a man who fell in love with the wrong woman. I sat with that for a long time on the drive back to Naperville. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in late June. It was framed as a preliminary financial disclosure hearing, procedurally routine, the kind of thing that appears on court dockets between weightier matters. But Margaret had arranged for Dr. Wu to testify, and Roger Marsh, Derek's theatrical attorney, had not anticipated the scope of what was coming. He had prepared to dispute the $67,400 figure, to argue it fell within Derek's discretionary personal spending. He had not prepared for $214,000 and a Delaware LLC. I dressed carefully that morning. Not to perform anything, not strength or beauty or defiance. I dressed because it was a significant day and it deserved the attention. Gray suit, good shoes, the small pearl earrings my mother had given me the year Derek and I got married. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. I had pictured these proceedings as more cinematic, somehow, when in fact family court is compact and fluorescent and smells faintly of paper and institutional coffee. Derek sat at the opposite table with Roger Marsh and a younger associate. He was wearing the blue linen shirt again, or one very like it. He looked at me when I entered. I met his eyes for exactly 1 second, and then looked at Margaret and sat down. Dr. Wu testified for 40 minutes. She was methodical, unflappable, and spoke in the kind of precise financial language that is most devastating precisely because it contains no opinion. Only numbers, accounts, dates, structures. Roger Marsh cross-examined her with the practiced aggression of a man attempting to create doubt where there is clarity. He asked about industry standard commission structures. He asked about Delaware LLC regulations. He asked whether it was possible that a consulting LLC of this type might have legitimate business purposes. Dr. Wu said, "In theory, yes. However, there are no invoices, no client engagements, no correspondence with third parties, no deliverables of any kind associated with Halcyon Consulting Group over its 3 years of operation. The account received funds. The funds were withdrawn in cash and through transfers to Mr. Haynes's personal accounts. There is no evidence of any business activity." Marsh pivoted. He argued that my overly aggressive litigation strategy constituted financial waste of its own, that my attorney's fees, my engagement of a forensic accountant, were themselves a drain on marital assets. He began to read from a prepared statement about my emotional instability, referencing vaguely documented psychological treatment. Margaret was on her feet before he finished the sentence. She filed an emergency motion to strike, citing Derek's prior attempt to weaponize my medical history, which was in the record because of the conversation I had begun recording. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Solano, looked at Marsh over her reading glasses with the precise expression of someone who has heard this exact argument too many times. "Mr. Marsh," Judge Solano said, "I'm going to ask you to redirect your argument toward the financial documentation in front of us, which is both substantial and specific. Mental health treatment is not relevant to asset division, and any further reference to it will result in sanctions." She paused. "Is that clear?" Marsh straightened his pocket square and said yes. Derek, across the table, had stopped looking at me. He was looking at the surface of the table. There is a particular stillness that comes over a person when they understand, for the first time, that they are not going to win. Not a dramatic collapse, just a subtraction of forward energy, like a fire that has found its oxygen cut off. I recognized it because I had felt something like it myself, standing at the bottom of my own staircase in March. The difference was that I had turned mine into something. He had only just arrived at his. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. When she returned, she issued a preliminary ruling. Derek's commission diversions constituted dissipation of marital assets under Illinois law. The Delaware LLC, Halcyon Consulting Group, would be treated as a marital asset, and its funds, all $214,000, would be included in the marital estate subject to equitable distribution. Full trial was scheduled for October, but the preliminary ruling established the framework within which any settlement would have to operate. I walked out of the courthouse behind Margaret and into the yellow June afternoon, and I stopped on the sidewalk, and I breathed. Not triumph. Not quite. Something more specific. The sensation of a wrong being officially named, of the record being corrected, of saying, "This happened, and it was a lie. And now everyone in the room knows it." Margaret said, "They'll want to settle now. This changes everything." I said, "Let them come to us." She almost smiled again, this time fully. They came to us within the week. Roger Marsh's office called Margaret on a Tuesday and requested a settlement conference. Margaret scheduled it for Friday. I sat in her conference room the evening before, going through every number, every document. I was not nervous. I was precise. The conference took place in a neutral law firm's conference room on Michigan Avenue. Derek arrived first with Roger Marsh. He looked diminished, not physically, but structurally, as if the framework he'd been operating from had been quietly removed, and he was still trying to stand where it used to be. I arrived with Margaret and Dr. Wu. I sat across from Derek and felt nothing in particular. Not anger, not sorrow, just clarity. The emotional temperature of a person who has done the work and knows the numbers and has stopped needing to be right because the record has established it for them. Margaret opened with our position. We were not there to negotiate. We were there to formalize. Marsh had expected a negotiation. Margaret was offering a structured resolution. The terms, the house, free and clear, to me, the full investment account of $212,000, to me, offset against the $214,000, diverted through Halcyon Consulting Group. Derek's personal savings account split 60-40 in my favor. Derek would retain his business assets and retirement accounts in exchange for waiving any claim to the marital residence or investment account. Attorney's fees and forensic accounting costs paid by Derek, given that his misconduct had necessitated the investigation. Marsh countered with roughly half. Margaret did not move. "Mr. Marsh, your client has 3 months until October, at which point Dr. Wu's full findings enter the public record. The Delaware LLC, the cash withdrawals, the commission diversions, all of it. Whatever reputation Mr. Haynes has left in Chicago, real estate will be significantly affected. I'd advise your client accordingly." Derek leaned toward Marsh and said something quietly. Then, "My client would like a brief recess." "Of course," Margaret said. They stepped out. Outside the windows, the Chicago River moved west toward the lake. They came back in 11 minutes. Derek signed everything. I signed my copies at the same table, set down the pen, and that was that. Outside on Michigan Avenue in the July heat, I let myself have 1 full minute of something I hadn't permitted in 4 months, feeling the weight lift. Not celebration, something quieter. The relief of having carried something heavy all the way to where it needed to go. but I need to tell you about the phone call. 3 weeks after the settlement, a Thursday evening in late July, I was on my porch with a book when my phone rang. Ms. Haynes? My name is Gerald Stokes, estate attorney in Portland, Oregon. I'm calling regarding the estate of Mr. James Whitfield. James, my first husband. The voicemail I'd left in March that had gone unreturned. Mr. Whitfield passed away in April. You are named as the sole primary beneficiary of his estate. A pause. The estate has been appraised at approximately $120 million. The evening light was doing something remarkable over my yard. Everything gold and still. I said, "You mentioned a condition." James had left a letter. His condition was retrospective. The beneficiary had to have faced a significant personal adversity and met it with integrity. He had kept quiet, distant track of my life over the years. He had heard about the divorce. He believed I was the kind of person who would meet it honorably. The condition was not a test to be passed. It was a character already demonstrated, waiting to be acknowledged. I sat on my porch long after the call ended. What do you do when the worst year of your life turns out to be the year someone witnessed you from a distance and believed in you anyway? You sit with it. You let it be large and strange and real, and then you move forward. I quit my job in September. 3 months' notice, clean exit. I had $120 million and a clear sense of what I wanted, and that made the Chicago commute feel like someone else's obligation. I sold the Naperville house in spring. I had reclaimed it, and that was enough. The proceeds went into a foundation named for my mother, the Patricia Haynes Foundation. Legal aid for women navigating divorce without resources. Most women walk into the most adversarial situation of their lives, unable to fight properly, and settle for less than they're owed. By the end of the second year, we'd assisted over 400 women with representation they couldn't have afforded otherwise. That number is what I'm most proud of. I moved to Marfa, Texas. The landscape had never left me since I'd visited years before. The flatness, the enormous sky, the light that doesn't apologize, a wide house on a hillside, bookshelves on every wall, the desert changing color every morning from my porch. Now about Derek and Christine. Derek lost his real estate license 8 months after our settlement. The IDFPR found he had misrepresented his commission arrangements to clients and his brokerage. Suspended. Never restored. His relationship with Christine didn't survive the year. They had only ever been a secret, then a crisis. When the crisis resolved, there was nothing underneath. Christine sent one letter, genuine, regretful. I didn't respond, not from cruelty, but because sometimes the most honest thing you can do with an ending is let it be one. I am not lonely. I am exactly where I chose to be. What I learned is simple. The moment you stop protecting someone else's comfort at the cost of your own truth, the world reorganizes itself around what is real. What would you have done? Leave your answer in the comments. Share this with someone who needs it today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for being